So a little bit of logistics before we get started. We're going to be building the same app that we built. We've been building for the last 3 lectures. We're going to finish up auth. We're going to build our second model today. And then after that, whatever people want to do, if we have extra time, just ask and we can build that. I think on Thursday, I'm going to deploy this to Heroku. So that's what's going on. Sorry, my dog's distracting even me. But really quickly, next week on Thursday and Friday, not this week, next week, is obviously Thanksgiving. Knowing that like that's supposed to be the end of, I think, our 2 weeks of like project review weeks. But I'm down to extend that deadline to just a week. I talked to Corinna about it. And so I know I'm going to still be available for another week after that. So feel free to float questions my way for that week. If at the end of the week after Thanksgiving, you still haven't done a project review or you don't have a completed project, let me know so that we can figure out logistical stuff, because after that, I might be put on a different assignment. I might be sent somewhere else. And after that, we're going to be talking about graduation and stuff. So just let me know how that's going. If the week after Thanksgiving you don't have anything, especially, or you're still struggling, let me know. Because that's kind of our unofficial deadline for when you're supposed to get your reviews done. That being said, I don't expect that to be the case for everybody. But we're also talking about 2 weeks from now. So just keep that all in mind. Cool. Other logistics things. We have office hours tomorrow at 6. I'm probably going to do some additional office hours on Friday. And I might try to slip in some Thursday if I have a little bit of time. But it would probably be during the day, which has not received any sort of response so far. But if you need office hours during the day, let me know and I will make that happen. Cool. That's that. Talked about deploying Heroku on Thursday. I don't have any plans for next week for any lectures. We have like Tuesday, I could potentially give a lecture. I'm not giving a lecture on Thanksgiving because I'm going to be eating a lot of food. I think that's it. Any questions before we get started? Cool. Oh, and also last thing, let me know when you pass your review. Because then I've got to double check that they've clicked the correct buttons to say you're ready to graduate. And that is something that I found that some instructors don't do for you in the past. So I have legitimately had people for like 2 months after passing being like, hey, I never got an email about graduation. And don't be that person. Make sure that that I know what's going on and I will double check everything for you. Thursday's probably not our last lecture. I'm probably going to figure out something to do on Tuesday just because that's fun. And our last lecture is going to be Intro to Graduation, which I'm going to lead, where I go ahead and talk a little bit about what the job search is like, what it's like getting into the field, and give you some last final wise words before we get started, with like sending you off into the real world, being developers and building very cool things, creating the next Neopets, and I guess making $1 billion. Cool. So then I'm going to dive into this app, right? Well, last time we built this out, we had an auto login, right? Which means that when I refresh this page, you see very briefly there's a login. And then what happens is on our back end, we get a hit to our auto login path, which goes ahead and checks our token. I can actually show you just the whole workflow. We have our app.js. It goes ahead and checks, see if there's a local storage token. If so, Sorry, she wants down. Basically, we check to see if there's a token. If so, we run our auto login effect, which we are grabbing from our action creators right here, which in a reducer basically sets a fetch, sending our local storage token and our authorization. And then in response, when we get a response, it goes ahead and first off resets that token in case something has changed. This is probably redundant, but depending on how you set up your token and whether they expire, always good to do. And then we dispatch the user that we get sent back to our set user, actually in our reducer. Then it gets placed into our state as user, and that's how we just make this work. And then it'll automatically re-render based on whether we are logged in or not. Like this goes ahead and says, hey, if we have a username, go ahead and use our switch statements, make our app work. Otherwise, only render the auth page. Are we all clear on that before I go into new stuff? Is there anything we want to dig into? Anything that became a little bit less clear after the lecture? All right. Well, in that case, there's one more thing we have to do, right? Right now, I can, if I'm signed in, I still can't sign out. So let's just go ahead and build our sign out feature before we do anything else. I'm going to put this in nav, right? And here, I might make these both buttons. I'm just going to like button, and we can style it later, but I want this to be a button. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and add another button that just goes ahead and says log out. Add this little thing, or we can not. And now we can take a look at our code, and here we have CL restaurants and log out. Cool. This doesn't work yet, but that's fine. Cool. And what logout really needs to do is a couple of things, right? We need to, first off, have some sort of case logout, which can state, and then user. We can go back to our initial user. This will work. If we want to make sure that this is like, we can always refactor this later, I can always do something like this. And then we just do initial user in both cases. So in this case, we are just creating this object that is, and saying it equal to a variable that just has a username that's an empty string. And that's what our initial user looks like, right? It's our null case for our user. And we are now using that both in our initial state and in our logout method, right? So next up, we need to figure out, we need to dispatch this method, which means we need to create an action in our action creators, right? So we have a method to allow us to log out. And second, at some point, we're going to need a clear local storage. Arbitrarily, this is a design, I think. I really don't like having my reducer have any side effects at all. If I can help it. I think that's a little bit bad practice. I might be wrong on that. But I would much rather the action creator have side effects, because that's kind of what thunk is for. So I'm going to go ahead. And what I mean by a side effect is something that's like changes the app that isn't like usually a function has, it does some stuff and then it returns something else. What it returns, that's kind of its main effect, right? Like it does that thing. When we say when we say a side effect, it means like while this function is executing before the return statement, it goes ahead and does something else. It can be something like console logging, print something into the console. It can be go do a fetch request, or it can be like any number of other things that aren't just return values, right? It is very helpful and makes me feel much safer knowing my reducer doesn't have those. Because side effects are often like places where you can have errors, right? Like you're going ahead and like storing stuff in some general state. And I would love for my reducer to not be subject to those. Can we call an action creator from within another action creator? I don't see why not. There might be some blogs on the internet about it. But I would like, in that case, right, you're doing 2 dispatch actions, which is a little bit messy, right? And I'm not even sure if that'll work. You ever see the the end of the Blair Witch Project when there's just that man standing in the corner facing the corner? Because that's what my dog's currently doing by my outlet. Hey, knock it off. Cool. She's been asleep all day, but now that I'm lecturing, she wants to get involved. Cool. So I'm going to go right here, and I'm just going to, like, I would go ahead, and if that was the case where I was doing 2 actions at once, that means you're calling on your reducer twice and you're changing state twice. It might be better to just write an action that handles both cases, right? That like sends all that data at the same time. That might not always be the case, but like I wouldn't like send 2 requests to my reducer at the same time for the fun of it. And that's, I think, my answer to can we call an action creator from another action creator. I also think in this case, right, our action creator doesn't dispatch directly. The dispatch gets called. So I don't know if it'll actually work. Maybe with Thunk it could. But I'm unsure. If you find out, let me know. But here I'm going to create like this little export const log out. Yeah, for sure. And here, basically, we're going to first just go local storage.clear. And then we can send our dispatch. And this will go ahead and both clear our local storage and send a log out. I would rather use like, there are a couple places where we could have called local storage.clear. We could have had it been like when you click this button, you do it right here. That would go against making these components as presentational as possible. And if I wanted to use my logout method somewhere else, it would be a little messy. I would have to reuse the code. If I put in my reducer, then suddenly my reducer has side effects, which I'm a little sketched out by. If I put in my action creator though, Thunk was made to allow us to do side effects and then call dispatch. So I find that that's probably the best place to do it, but this is just my design pattern and what I thought about here. Cool. So now we can go ahead and in our nav, we can import connect from React Redux. We can connect. And then we don't need any map state to props yet. We might eventually. But we can go ahead and import logout from /redux/action creators. And here we now can grab our logout method, have it in props. You can destructure this here, logout on click equals. Okay. Let's go check to see that this works, and then we can talk about it. Refresh. Cool. First off, I just want to double check. How are we feeling about this syntax? What am I doing here? Can someone walk me through it, and can everyone else just give me like a scale of 1 to 10 how you understand it?
You're passing this method in through map dispatch the props, but you deconstructed the props, so you can just use logout instead of props logout.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Naomi, what's up?
I was gonna say the same.
Cool. So we're all now cool on this. I'm not losing anybody when I do this. Are we all tens here? Feel free
Just
to
just
go
to
for it.
clarify, you're just calling out the action from the action creators.
Yeah.
Is
The,
it more like reducing pretty much? Or
the
like
important
not
the important
reducing. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, you're nailing it. But the important thing here is we're deconstructing. And we're deconstructing in our assignment. This doesn't really have this part right here doesn't have as much to do with map state to prop or like map dispatch to props. It has more to do with what we're saying here is I know what you're going to pass in as props is going to be an object. I only want the logout key from it, and you can call it logout. So yeah, just quick demonstration of it just happening in normal cases. Function, say name, person, goes ahead, and we can have like console.log person.name, right? Like this is a classic way to do a function. And if I have like const person equals name Peter Graves, alma mater, U of M. Cool. We can now call say name on person and we'll get Peter Graves. Like this is the classic way to write a function. We haven't done anything specifically weird about this, right? But I'm taking in a whole object that's a person and I'm only using person.name here. So what I could do instead is I can go ahead and be like, hey, I'm expecting an object that has a name key inside of it. And now when I do say name with person, it will still give me Peter Graves. Cool. Naomi, what's up?
Yeah, I totally get everything you're saying. I just have like a quick question when dealing with JWT tokens. Like when you're creating a form that needs a user, do you use the token that which you pretty much use in your fetch?
We are going to get to that later this lecture. So very good question. Mind if I answer that in an hour?
Yeah.
Cool. And as long as one person gets that Peter Graves graduated from the U of M, then I think I've done my job here. So at this point, we can dive into like setting the rest of our code up. There's one thing like this sucks to see when you haven't logged in yet. Like if I click log out, this means nothing to me as a user and probably gets probably that was the cutest thing I've ever seen. But probably gets like is a little bit weird. So what we can go, Naomi, what's up?
I think I have a solution for that.
Yeah, what is it?
So I think you can do like an if statement. If you go back to your code, I think in your
let's go ahead. Am I on this right? Oh, I'm on the wrong code right now, and I'm looking at the wrong screen too. I'm just gonna close this out because that was very goofy of me. To just be like, look, I was looking at my Rails code and be like, hey, where's my we don't need to analyze that. But yeah, cool. Let's go ahead. Walk me through this.
In your auth, I believe, or
our auth is just the form. So our auth doesn't choose whether to see this.
Or
it's
like,
our nav that does that.
Yeah, the nav. I think you should say if user is logged in, then have that logout button. Else, then disregard or re-render the nav. Oh no, you can't do that.
Cool. There's a couple of things you're spot on. I'm going to do a couple of things slightly differently. Just because there's a couple steps you need to do. So what you're really asking us to do is say like, if we're logged in, show the traditional nav. If we're not logged in, show something else. And you've also said the way we can check that is to see if we have a user.
Else, if we have a user, then render that button.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go ahead and do that. So first off, can anyone bring me through how we can check to see if we have a user? I can go ahead and pull my reducer to the side just in case that's helpful for anybody.
You can do, I think, authentication. I think you did it in your action or not.
So it would be a little difficult to like run an action to check things out, right? But we do have in our Redux store, we are either saving a username or we're saving an empty string. So can someone just bring me through how to basically make this app so that we can check to see if we have a username?
Or that connect with, instead of having it null, have something there.
I think that was a great proposal. Cool. We'll just do map state to props, our classic map state to props, take in state, and return. Boop. Username, state, user, that username. Cool. When I do this, do people kind of get what I'm doing here?
The
We're doing-
username comes from authentication, so we have to have a JWT token in order to have a username saved in our state store.
Yeah. Like regardless of how we find out whether we're logged in, whether someone's typed like logged in via typing stuff out, or whether somebody's logged in via having that existing token, right? What we do know is when we're done logging in, there will be a username here. When we're not, it'll be an empty string, which is in JavaScript false, right? Or falsy. So here, we can now go ahead and take this username in, right? And we can console log it. Cool. Boop. We get an empty string. We can go ahead. Hey, are you true? We get false. So now we can do what Naomi suggested. The one thing I would caution against, right? It's very common to want to do an if statement here, right? Where you go ahead and say if username, do this, else do this, right? And you can see already it's getting mad at us. We can do something like this. Where we go ahead and say return this bad boy, else return I don't know, nav hello user, sign in or sign up.
Or you could just render the auth.js component.
So we're already that's already happening elsewhere in our app, right? Our app is
Okay.
already doing this, like this thing elsewhere, right? This right here is the auth component. This is the nav component, and this is what we're trying to fix right now. If you ever find yourself writing a big if statement that's returning two JSX elements, the strong preference from React developers, just the thing that we use, because this is pretty gross, is to go ahead and use our ternary, which will allow us to put this return once, and then go ahead.
You want the stuff's reading?
Yeah.
And this right here will now allow us to do something that just looks a little bit neater, right? We can go and be like bloop, bloop. So this is just like how React developers will write this, right? We're going ahead and saying, let's use a ternary operator. Here's a thing. Here's another thing. Another thing that React developers can do. Logged in, render, or whatever. this bad boy. And const logged out render. So you can go ahead and use this. And this right here. Yeah, and you said this straight up. We're following these instructions. We can go ahead and say username logged in render logged out render. Cool. And then our return statement is very clean. We've got some JSX elements, and this is like, I'd say, my favorite way to see React done. You can always use the ternaries and not use the function. I would recommend though using a ternary over an if statement. And the reason I'm just bringing that up now is because you're going to start running into errors if you try to put like that return before an if. You need to have a different return inside your if and inside your else. And that just gets pretty confusing to new people. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about like how we render things conditionally here. But does this make sense, everybody? I like clearly, Naomi, this was your vision, so I think you're good with this, right? Unless there's something particularly weird. We all cool with the idea of using a function here? Awesome. So now we can go ahead and we can check this out. We've got hello user, sign in or sign up, Nikki, guest. And now our nav goes ahead and changes to CL restaurants or log out. And this all works. Cool.
But that's just like they don't see it in a nav bar. They can still visit that page, right? Unless it's like a private route.
We're actually handling this slightly different. I haven't done any private routes, which is a very good thing to write a blog post on if you've been playing around with it. But right here in my actual app, I have like a, hey, if there's a user, go ahead and use all of my routes. Otherwise, render off regardless. This is simple. You're right. A private route is probably better in that situation. And like, if you're curious about what that is, there's a lot of cool blog posts on it. Basically, it is very common to be able to higher order component that goes ahead and will basically allow you to inherit some certain properties to allow you to redirect unless they're logged in. And if not, just go ahead and render that component. It's cool. And it's a really good introduction to higher order components. I haven't actually like read a blog post on it in like 2 years. I used to like every now and then like incorporate them. I am wondering if they do anything interesting with hooks, but it is an alternative to just doing this, which works in small apps. Wouldn't work very well in big apps where you have like a lot of things that a user can do when they're logged in and a lot of things a user can't do when they're logged in. Or sorry, a lot of things the user can't do when they're not logged in, but also a lot of things the user can do when they're not logged in. There was a double negative there. Makes it great for teaching, very clear. But we now have the ability to log in and log out. Our next step, I think, is to create the ability to create reviews. Is that cool with everybody? Is that a good thing to be doing? All right.
Wait, repeat that again.
We're going to have the ability to review these.
Oh,
these.
yes.
Cool. I haven't given you all a 2 model project build since Rails, so let's go ahead and build this. So first up, right, we probably need something on the back end to store a bunch of reviews, right? We need to have the model there before we can really start building this out on the front end. So I'm going to go ahead and in my backend, I'm going to do Rails G resource review. And I'm going to give this a user that it belongs to. I'm going to give it a restaurant that it belongs to. I'm going to give it a rating. That's an integer. and I'm going to give it content, which is just going to be a string. Cool. Anyone want to change anything up here? I don't have any personal opinions.
Just in case it gets too long, like text instead of content instead of a string.
Yeah. There we go. That's a good idea. Cool. Gonna run this. We will now see a bunch of new stuff. We will see our migration, which looks normal. It's not called text, right? That's what I'm getting wrong. Oh, it's called by, it's dealing with the fact that I already went ahead and did this in the test field. So I'm just going to drop my database, restart it. This is my constant issue of, ooh, there's one other session using the, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm running Rails. Rails DB drop. Rails DB create. Rails DB migrate. Do we have seeds? Yes. Cool. And we can go ahead. Rails console. Restaurant dot first. User dot first. Do we have one yet? User dot create. Username. Mickey. Password. Yes. Cool. I'm going to actually go ahead and add that to our seeds. So we don't have to worry about this again if we ever need to test stuff. Boop. I'm going to go ahead and now everyone will know my password. Remember that this is not secure. So if I push this up to GitHub, I'm going to have to change all my passwords off guest. But we can now go ahead and test this out, see if we can create a review. So we've got restaurant.first. This is going to be Naya. And we can go ahead and say dot reviews dot create user dot first rating 4 and content. This is the first review on this app. And we get this error because I forgot to go ahead and cool, this works. As many reviews as many users through reviews. We might not need this, but why not? As many reviews as many restaurants through reviews. This will be helpful because this right here gives us what? What does line 4 give us? Just like in terms of our app, it gives us a method for
Methods.
sure. But yeah, what specifically, if I called like restaurants on a user, what it'll give us?
Restaurants that's associated with a review.
Yeah, and what do we mean by associated in this specific case, like in this app?
Meaning like you can see the reviews from that specific restaurant.
Well, if I call like a
Okay.
user.restaurants, right?
You can
But this
see
is actually,
that a user left for a specific restaurant.
yeah,
Or I don't know. You see which restaurants they left a review for.
yes. If I call user.first.restaurants, I can see all of the restaurants that user has reviewed, which already gives me a great feature. If I decide, hey, later I want to like show the users all the restaurants that they've reviewed, all I need to do is serve them their restaurants, logged in user.restaurants. Cool. Go ahead. Try this again. I should have used reload here. Boop. We now have a little review. Cool. We can call restaurant.first .reviews, and we get a list of reviews. We can call .users We can get a list of, we can get all the users that have submitted a review. We can call user.first.restaurants. And we can see that I've reviewed Naya. And this bad boy right here also works. I'm going to go copy this into our seed file. The next thing I'm going to do really quickly, because this is important, validates rating numericality less than or equal to 5, greater than or equal to 1. Just going ahead and making sure that we've got some validations here so that people can't rate it 1,000. And now if I go ahead and try this again, user, let's go ahead and create a new review. Nope. Cool. Interesting. Cool, there we go. Cool. Rating must be less or equal to 5. We have an error here. Everything's working out. How'd that all feel? Did that feel like ancient history to everyone? You all feeling okay? Cool. So next up, right? We are going to go ahead and start using this, right? We can go ahead and in our restaurant show serializer, really like we only want the reviews when we're seeing the restaurant show page, right? And we want it every time we see that restaurant show page. Cool. So a very like a rookie move right here would be to, for the next step, right, make a fetch here to a separate restaurant/12/reviews route or restaurant/1/reviews route. In our case, right, we are in charge of what data gets yielded back in our fetch. So I'm currently, when I'm loading up this page, right, on restaurant, I'm currently only receiving data for that restaurant. It doesn't have to be that way though. Right now, if I go to localhost 3000/restaurants/1, it gets mad at me because I'm not running Rails. We go here. We get Nia and Chelsea. But if I go ahead and in my show serializer, I go has many reviews, then it's going to go ahead and give me an array of reviews. And then in one fetch, I already have all these reviews available. We can even go over here. Ooh, it's mad at me now because we're not running Rails. Oh, because I reset my database. Whoops. Local storage.clear. You'll notice right here, I have a token of undefined because I went ahead and I sent a token from my old database over to the new one. I was like, hey, this is a user ID of 3. And it's like, I have no idea where a user ID of 3 is. We've only created one user here. So just remember when we're resetting our database, it makes things a little bit weird. But Nikki, guest, is now back. And if we go to Naya Chelsea, right, you'll notice, or Naya, I've never been there. You'll now notice in our Redux store, you'll actually see it has gone ahead and given us in our selected restaurant a reviews array, which has our reviews in it. This is because this already fetches to the route that the restaurant show serializer uses. We can go ahead and see in our restaurants controller. This goes ahead and uses this restaurant show serializer. So we're already sending this information over, which is awesome. All we need to do is add it to our serializer and it got sent over. So now, one thing I want to make sure that we do is always keep in null case for everything in your state. So before we fetch, we should have an empty array of reviews so that I don't have any errors later on in my code. But now we basically have almost everything we need to start rendering extant reviews. I can now go into our restaurant show page, and we can start building out a way to actually display these reviews that we have. Did I lose anybody on any particular thing? What was the most confusing thing I did? I didn't have to change my controller at all to start rendering reviews out. I just changed my serializer and it went ahead and did everything for us. I actually do want to go one step further here. Right now, this is helpful, but I would love to go ahead and say, hey, for a review serializer, let's go ahead and we only need it when we're calling it for something else. I'm going to create this username, and then we can just do def username self.object.user.username. Now we have our username here too. What I'm saying is when you serialize, like this is going to call the review serializer by default. Our review serializer, I'm going ahead and saying, hey, there's another attribute that runs this method. And I can just call self.object to find out which object, what's the object that we're trying to serialize here. Call its user method to get its user from the database, and then give me its username. What's the most confusing part of this? How are we feeling? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down. Feel free to sound off in the chat.
So online, so the method username, you're just pretty much attaching the username onto the serializer.
Yeah, I'm saying whenever you serialize a review, go ahead and go to find its user and then give me that username.
Okay.
So that we don't have to go ahead and re-grab that. Those of you who are SQL geniuses know that this can use some optimizing, right? Right here, we are, every time we're rendering a restaurant, we're getting all of its reviews. And then for all of its reviews, we are going to the user table again and again. It might end up in a situation where if we have 30 reviews, we're hitting the user table like 30 times. So learning how to eager load is something that might be something that is interesting for you if you want to like start doing backend jobs. It's something that you should just be prepared to talk about. It's called an N+1 issue. If you're applying for a backend job specifically in Rails, or in a similar SQL based like framework, and you're advertising your SQL ability, make sure that you know that like this right here might lead to some inefficient queries. If you're not planning on marketing your SQL strengths, don't worry about it for now. But we now have here in our SQL store an array of reviews that includes our username. And we can go ahead and start using this. Now, in the old way we did React, we would make this this like set of reviews a child component of restaurant show and pass down the reviews as props. Since we have Redux, we don't need to pass down any props at all. I can go ahead right here. I'm going to create a new thing that I'm going to call reviews.js, and this is going to be our little container. Do a little function reviews right here. Going to import connect from React Redux. And then this right here. Is going to use our map state to props to specifically grab the reviews. We're just gonna go right here, equals state, taking this, and we can go ahead and return. Oh, right, this is reviews, state, selected restaurant reviews. And now here, do a little div action here, give it a class name of reviews. And here I can be like, give me my reviews, reviews.map. And here we go ahead and take each review and create a review card component. Pass in our review, give it a key, which will probably be the review.id. And this will be how we go ahead and render out a bunch of review cards. We haven't built out the review cards yet. I'm gonna work that through from the back a little bit. Import review card from / components. And then here, I'm going to actually build out our review card. At this point, I've built way too much out without checking my code. So I'm going to go function review card. And this isn't going to be anything fancy. I'm just going to return div hello world. And we can export default review card. Ooh. And now we can go ahead and put this in our main exporting file. And we can try this out. Let's add this to our restaurant show page. I'm just going to go ahead and in our loaded page, I'm going to add reviews. Import reviews from / components. Oh wait, no, we're back in components again. This should be a container at this point, I feel like, but / works. Ooh. I'm missing a return statement, I bet. Nope. Yep. Return. Cool. We now get hello world, which is all we needed right now. But you'll see a couple of errors. Oh, right. Let's refresh the page. There we go. You will see, you go to our components, right? We have a review card that has all of our props in it. Now that we built this out, to actually talk about what I just did, because I think I went through that a little fast. We have a restaurant show component, right? Which shows all the information from a restaurant. It should probably be a container at this point. It just is doing a lot of stuff. I might be wrong, but this makes sense. This kind of makes it a container. I'm torn. But this, yeah, go ahead.
You're just rendering the props, so it would be a component.
Yeah. The reviews is itself mapping through a bunch of things and creating things, right? But you're probably right. This is probably not that bad. But here, I can now go I now have this component that I've called reviews, right? And ordinarily we would have done something like this. Reviews equals reviews, where we got that from here, right? If we were just doing vanilla React, right, we'd have fetched our restaurant information, gotten our restaurant information, stored it on restaurant show, and then pass it down to our reviews. Because we're using Redux and we're keeping all of our data in Redux in our Redux store, we don't actually need to pass any props into our reviews. We can just go right ahead and grab it from our Redux store in the reviews in our reviews component. And here we go ahead through these reviews, map them, and return a bunch of review cards that have all of these props in them. In console, you now go props, console.log props, and we will see a couple of things that we could be able to do with them. Ooh. Cool. We get an ID, we get a rating, we get content, and we get a username. Let's go ahead. First, we can destructure this. Username, rating, review, or content. I'm not going to go ahead in JavaScript. It's slightly harder to do that like 5-star, 4-star, 3-star thing. I have to like actually do some fancy stuff. I can't just multiply a string by 3 like it's Ruby. There's also a bunch of other things we could do with this. We could like now we have JavaScript. We can make it so like each of the stars is its own button. We can use that to edit things. There's a lot of things we can do now. So I'm probably just going to keep this like this for now. Or just it says the word stars rather than doing anything else. But now I'm just going to go ahead and give it content. And then we probably shouldn't write the word username. We should instead say username. And we can try this out. Nikki says 4 stars. This is the first review on this app. Nailed it. Cool. How are we feeling?
So can you go to your action creators, I believe, or the one you do the no, not there, the reducer.js.
Mhm.
So when you're doing, okay, so when you're posting, like you're not calling the reducer.
Well, we haven't ended up posting anything yet. Our next step will be to, right?
Oh,
The next
oh,
step is to
okay.
create a review. Right now, we're just rendering the existing reviews that we've hard coded in our backend. Our next step is to make this something that a user can submit to. So right now, all we're doing is we've included in our serializer a bunch of reviews, create a place to store them in our reducer, and then went ahead and started rendering them out. My thought process was we should do this first before we start creating reviews so that we can actually see the stuff we created. Our next step right here will be to actually create it. So I'm going to go ahead and create something that I'm going to call review form.js. Cool. And here we can start building out our review form. So I'm going to do function review form, loop, 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 export default review form. And that's probably going to change eventually. I'm going to put this into our index.js. Cool. And then this right here for now, we can just have a return. I am where you will write your reviews. Yay. And then back in our restaurant show page, we can go ahead and import this too. And we can just slap that on right over here. And now we have I'm where you will write your reviews. This is just, we're just creating a component at this point. This isn't anything fancy yet. But this will also allow us to start building out this form. I'm going to go ahead and say form/form. And here we can start doing a little reactive form. And I'm going to copy and paste to get started. React form. This is always the most pointless thing I Google. Like, first off, React form isn't just necessarily any really different than a form, but we can go ahead and say rating. We can make this a number, value of rating. I forget how to do this. Let's go ahead and number field HTML minimum maximum. Okay, cool. Min 1, max equals 5. So in this case, the source of truth isn't on the DOM, it's in our state, which I haven't thought too much about. We can get to it eventually. We should go ahead and do, let's go ahead and say content, or I won't even really give this. Yeah, let's go ahead. We'll just call it content for now. And here I'm just going to do a text area. Name. Content. That's text area. Take a look at it really quickly, and then we're probably going to change it. Cool. I have some styling for this somewhere. Wow. Cool. CSS. There we are. Called a dot new review. Okay, sure. That's name equals dot new review. New underscore review. Shameful. All right. And there we go. Cool. We have a form. So our next step, right? Oops. Is let's go ahead and make this a controlled form. Do state from React. Go ahead and say review or rating. Equals use state, and we'll start off with 1. Let's start off with 5. You know, give people the benefit of the doubt. Const content set content equals use state, and then we can go ahead and say empty string, and here we can do a little on change equals set rating. Let's actually be more specific here. Take in E. Yeah, target the value. And non-change here. And we should also give this the value of rating. on change equals, do the same thing. I think text areas or something I always forget. Set content e.target value, or is it inner text? We'll find out soon enough. I bet it'll throw an error if I do this wrong. Cool. Aha. Use the value. Great. I'm not one to argue with React. Value equals loop. You good? Cool. I'm going to double check that everything's working. We have here our view form. We have a state of 5. We toggle this down. Our state switches. Great. It's a string, which I don't necessarily like. I go down here. Does it get mad at me? It doesn't change it. Cool. Great. And then right here, we can be like, let's test that this is also working. And it is. Cool. So this is now stored in our state. We don't have the stuff, right? We now have to handle it in some sort of way. And there's a lot of things we can do. But basically, the most important thing is we have to fetch to our backend to create a new review, right? So let's go ahead and build this out. On submit equals take an E. What's the first thing we want to do?
You want to get the value, or well, yeah, e.prevent default.
And then, yeah, we've got these values, right? Basically, we want to start assembling our object that we want to send over to our backend, right? New review equals rating content. What else do we need for a review?
A user.
And the restaurant.
Yeah, the user and the restaurant. So the restaurant ID, we know, well, the user ID, we're actually going to have a little bit of help with that. In our fetch, we will have our local storage.token. So we don't actually need to send our user ID in directly. We can always, in our backend, figure out who it is. And it's actually more secure to do this way, right? So I'm going to ignore the user ID for now, but the restaurant ID we need to get from somewhere. And right now it's not in review form. There's two ways we can do it, right? We can go ahead, connect this to our backend. Or sorry, connect this to our Redux store to props. Here I can do const map state to props equals taken state and return restaurant ID. And we can go ahead and say that this is equal to state selected restaurant.id. Let's go ahead and double check that that's what it actually is in our reducer. At least here, I'm using that correctly. And selected restaurant right here is what we're calling it in our actual reducer. Ooh. Did I do something wrong? Constant submit, classic. Cool. And then we import connect from React Redux. I wouldn't be opposed in this situation since you already know that restaurant show has access to the ID, right? You could always go ahead and just pass this down as a prop here directly rather than using our Redux store. I don't care either way. If you want to see that, it basically looks like ID equals ID. And then we don't need to connect anything over here. Oops, we don't need to connect this ID over here because it'll just come through in our props. So this is like, oh right, restaurant ID is what I would probably call it. And I would probably call it restaurant ID here. But we don't need it because we have Redux. So now I can go ahead and say, this is a little bit goofy what I'm doing right now. I'm deciding, excuse me. No, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and until the end, keep it in JavaScript until the very last minute. So now we have this new review, right? Thanks. I'm gonna console.log it, new review. You can see that we have everything. Rating 5. Where's the beef? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Double check that we can console log. Cool. You got a restaurant ID of undefined row. I'm going to double check that that's actually what we're doing here. Restaurant ID is state.selected restaurant.id. Let's go ahead and console log state here. Console log state. Cool. Selected restaurant.id. Did I spell restaurant? Just gonna copy and paste it just in case. That looks right. I'm calling this restaurant ID here, spelled ideally correctly, but never be too careful. And then you can go refresh the page. Double check that this component has this prop. It does have a restaurant ID. All right, let's try this again. Where's the beef? Oh, this worked. Maybe I didn't refresh or something. Let's go try this out again. Old way. Oh. There is the beef. Slowly moving away from traditional where's the beef to a different sentence. But now we have everything here. Cool. Next up, we can go ahead and create this actual fetch. So I'm going to go to my action creators, right, which is where we do all of our fetches. Just go ahead and basically, export const submit review equals take in a review. And then we can go ahead and return dispatch fetch to at this point we need an endpoint. And I would argue restaurants are kind of reviews are kind of a nested resources under restaurant. So I'm going to go actually into my routes file. And here, I'm going to go ahead, delete this entirely, and then do the little end here, resources, reviews, only. For now, create. Now, if we go to localhost 3000/rails/info/routes, you can see we will have a little post path right here that will go to our restaurant ID. And I find this to just be a little bit better. Because it makes more sense restfully. And I can go ahead, do http:// localhost 3000 restaurants / let's go ahead and interpolate this. And here, actually, I'm going to take in the restaurant ID separately, just to make things a little bit neater. And we can go ahead, do our little method post headers. I'm going to go ahead and go back to I copy this, make sure I'm copying everything because I don't believe in leaving anything to chance or my own ability. I'm also going to copy this authorization token saying, hey, we're going to have a header right here called authorization that will have our local storage token. And because local storage is just stored on our computer, it's available anywhere. We do not have to like go into our Redux store and get it. And then here we have right here, you can give a body of JSON.stringify. I am already breaking my rule of copying and pasting everything, and I bet I'm going to do something wrong because of it. But here you can do .then .then console.log. I'm actually going to change this up a little bit because I think I said last time that I haven't really talked about a formal way for error handling in a while, and I want to show you a cool design pattern if you have a little bit of time. So I'm going to save this really quickly. Oh, and then we should probably eventually dispatch something. You can go ahead and say review dispatch. No, we don't. We're just canceling for now. Log. We're not using dispatch, which is bad, but we're cool. And so now here I'm going to go ahead, import submit review from /redux /action creators. We can go ahead and pass this in. Submit review right here. And here, now I'm basically going to do submit review, new review, and then restaurant ID. This will be enough to get us to a buy bug on the back end. So I'm going to go ahead in my reviews controller, do like a little def create and buy bug. Cool. So we can now try this out. I'm gonna go to a different restaurant. Cool. Just a normal Yelp review. We can submit this. And ideally, we have now hit our backend, right? You've now get submit review. It's coming in here, doing this here. You're not importing it here. Classic. And now we're in our bug. Cool. Params. We've got rating, content. We also have our restaurant ID. Cool. So we can go ahead and we can be like restaurant find that works. Oops. You'll find that restaurant, right? But ultimately what we need to do, right, is create a review. First off, we have logged in user. This is just something we have because we sent over a token. We've built our app right? So really all I need to do is gonna be like logged in user.reviews.create. And then our other parameters, let's go ahead and do like a little private def review params.permit restaurant ID. Oops. Rating content. I'm going to do review params. We can do render JSON. Let's go ahead and call this review. Cool. I am not doing error handling yet because I want to show you something cool after this. But for now, let's go ahead and try this out. Let's continue. Try this one more time. Submit. And now we get back an actual review. And we don't see it right now, but if we refresh our page, this review now exists. Cool. And this is one thing I've been getting a couple questions on, how we pass in the user, right? Remember, you can always do this, like logged in users.reviews.create. Our next step, right, is going to be to take this review and do something with it. But before we do, what was the weirdest part of what I just did?
So you pretty much just called in a method that returns the user, pretty much.
Yeah, that we built ourselves early on. Remember, we have this
Yeah.
like cool logged in user that takes a look at our decoded token, that like user get token method that looks at our authorization headers. And now, as long as our fetch requests come with this little authorization local storage.token, we can always, in any of our controller actions, run logged in user to find out who it is. It is a nifty bit of code that solves a lot of problems for everyone. Cool. So eventually I'm going to want to dispatch this. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, hey, let's go. This is going to be a little bit more complicated in our reducer, right? We are getting a new review. We're going to have to add it into the array inside selected restaurant under reviews. So here we can basically go case add review. And here I'm going to return ... state, of course. But then we have to go selected restaurant, right? And here I'm going to grab all of my current state.selected restaurant keys. But I'm also going to have my reviews take in state.selected restaurant reviews. And then tack on our new review. So what I'm doing right here is I'm saying, hey, give us a copy of state, but under the selected restaurant key, give us a copy of selected restaurant, but with a new key called reviews, which is a copy of the original reviews array, but with our new action.payload tacked onto the end of it. And actually, it's the newest one, so I'm going to be a little bit fancy here and make sure it shows up first. Cool. Rather than showing up at the bottom, so that our user can see what they did very immediately without like having to scroll down to the bottom. How are we feeling about this? This is tough. This is like some tough reducer logic that I just blitzed through here.
So you just copied the state
Mhm.
just to return the new state?
Yeah, so in everything we're doing here, we're being like, hey, return the initial state, but with the user updated to be this action.payload, right? In this case, we're saying return the initial state, but with the selected restaurant updated to be a copy of the original selected restaurant, but with a new key called reviews. And inside there, we're going to have both our new review and all of the reviews that were already in there.
Why do that?
Yeah. It's a little messy, right? But it goes ahead and allows us to just slap in a review, which is probably the quickest way to make this code work. In terms of like actual like running time of your your code. Another way to do that would just be to have your reviews yield back all of the reviews for that restaurant. Like you can always go ahead and say like render JSON review dot restaurant dot reviews, right? Like give me all the reviews for that restaurant, which is a little bit much, but it's not something you can't do. And then you can just go ahead and rewrite all of the reviews. But this one will go ahead and just take in a new review and tack it into our array in our backend. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to use this now. Like review. And then we can go ahead and say dispatch finally. Type add review payload, our new review. And we can check to see that this works. CL
So
restaurants. Yeah, go
does
for it.
So it's just like pushing the new review in the array.
Yeah, except we can't
Okay.
use push because that would
Oh,
be
okay.
modifying it directly. So we're instead creating an entirely new object that's a copy of everything, but with the reviews having one more item in it.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry that wasn't clear. The thing that I'm trying to solve here specifically is the fact that we can't call like state.selected restaurant.reviews.push, right? I would love that, but that would be mutating state directly. So instead we have to return a copy of state that has everything the same except for one thing changed. And that's kind of how reducers work. That's the rule we use. Cool. Let's go ahead and do this. Citizens of Chelsea. I'm going to name this, do 3 stars, just against people from Chelsea in general. And then we can go ahead and submit this. And interestingly, we don't get anything here. Did we? In a Redux store, I went add review, action creators, called set user. That's bad. Why did I do that? Nope, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Add review, this is right. Did I just not use the submit review method yet? Let's go ahead and in our review form. Submit review. I did not hit my add review thing. Let's try this one more time. For JK, they're all right. Oh. And that worked. Cool. I just didn't refresh the page. Cool. So we're submitting this and then it just pops up because we've added it to our reviews. I'm going to do a couple more things. I'm going to go ahead and in our actual review form, you can go ahead and do let's go ahead and say rating, set rating 5, set content empty string. I don't think you can do e.target.reset here for for reasons of the value is going to be what's hard coded. We need to update this in state. Testing this again. Boop. Cool. So that went ahead and worked. I'm going to talk a little bit in the next 5 minutes about error handling and show like a cool little novel thing, or a cool little thing that basically I finally went ahead and took a look at what I saw a pretty good design pattern and some reviews. So I'm going to go ahead and incorporate it. Does anyone know the difference between create and create?
I think create pretty much saves it to the database, and then create with the exclamation point. I talked about it a long time ago, but I think I kind of forgot.
If it's create, there's an exception that's raised if it's an invalid record.
Let's try this out. Let's go ahead and say user.first restaurant.first content. Yippee. Rating will be 12. 120, sure. Ooh, did I do something even more wrong than I expected? Anyone see it?
Isn't rating a like a string instead of a? Okay, never mind.
I don't know what I did differently this time.
Or maybe you did validation.
Yeah, that was the idea, right? Fascinating. I'm not gonna think too hard on this. But you'll notice what? Oh, I used an O rather than a 0. How did that happen? Nice, cool. Awesome. Once my math teacher in high school graded me wrong on a 3-part question because I wrote a little slash through my 0 to indicate that it wasn't a no because I had bad handwriting. She was like, that actually means null set. And I'm like, I think I was a freshman. I had never heard of the null set. She graded me off, and her name was Miss Patrick. I'm calling her out now instead of teaching for the next 5 minutes of lecture. So really, who's the bad teacher here? But you'll notice, right? I'm calling this, it's failing. We know it's failing because we don't have an ID. But it is returning a new review that has a null value, right? But if I do an exclamation point, it suddenly throws an error. Suzu, what are you up to, bud? So you'll notice that the slight difference here, this just gives us nil, this throws an error. So Omar, spot on. We have an active record, a record invalid. So this is the point where it'll just kill everything if we go ahead and do this. I'm going to go submit this, and then we get basically, I'm going to change this so that we don't have this as a front end check right yet. I'm going to give this maximum of 10. And then basically what I'm going to try to do right here, I'm going to give this like a hi there, submit. We get stars, but in our like actual backend, we get this big unprocessable entity. It's confused. It doesn't do anything, right? If I want to make this super useful, one thing I can do is I can go into my application controller and I can write something very interesting called rescue from active record invalid with, and then I can give it a method that I'm going to call render unprocessable entity. And here we'll take in an error. I'm just going to call invalid. I can go ahead and I can say, hey, render JSON errors invalid .record, right? And this, when I call .record on it, it's going to just trust me on this. It gives us the record that threw the error. And here I'm going to go ahead and say .errors .full messages to sentence. And then I am going to go ahead and I'm going to give it a status unprocessable entity. And I'm writing this in application controller. So now anything that throws an active record invalid error will then run this code and render this JSON for us. I'm gonna go show you what that looks like.
This is because otherwise it just spits out the HTML error page and then you don't know what the error is because it says, oh, it can't start with like the less than sign, I think.
Yeah, usually if I get a record invalid, it's going to go ahead and give us the status unprocessable entity, but it's not going to send back any errors for us. This right here goes ahead and says, hey, when you get this, don't just throw an error, rescue it, which is a term for when you would normally throw an error, run this code instead. So I'm saying rescue from this specific error class by instead immediately doing this, taking in that error, checking its record, checking what errors exist on it, and then doing like full messages to send, which is what we would be doing anyways. We would usually do something like this. Usually be like, hey, if review.valid else this bad boy, right? Except we would probably do review, right? This is the way that we used to do stuff like this, right? If you want to not have to write this for every single record that could potentially be invalid, you can instead go ahead and just use this code instead. Make it throw the error, make it get caught by our application controller and rescued, and then immediately render this JSON. Cool. I'm going to show you that this works. If we go ahead, I'm going to change up our review for our handling of our review form a little bit, where I'm going to go ahead and in our action creators, I'm going to give it a little if res.okay, I think. Then go ahead and do all this bad boy. Else, let's go ahead and do throw in a little debugger right here. And let's try this out. Jeez. Cool. We now hit our debugger, right? So it's checking to see if the response is okay. If we're getting like a regular 200 error code, like status code, right? For the moment, we get like a 400 status code, right? It's going to run this bad boy. And then we can go like res. You will see that we have to still go ahead res.json .then console.log. And I think that's not going to work in our console, but let's go ahead, do res.json .then errors, alerts, errors. Or I think it's res response.errors. Let's try it out. Hi again. And now we get rating must be less than or equal to 5. Cool. You can handle this error any way you would like. You can go ahead and like put it in your Redux store if you'd like to. You can use an alert page. You can make it a pop-up. Do whatever you want. But now any single time I want to create something, but I want to have it check validations before it goes ahead and renders JSON in case it doesn't send out back a list of errors. All I need to do is use this little bang operator. Cool. That I think is all I want to show you all today. Is there anything we want to dig into before I close up? All right.
A quick question.
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
So you know how you go into your Redux console, and I had this issue with my project the other day. What if your state is in your action?
If your state is in your action,
Yeah, like you see the payload, you have everything there like that, but it's not in your state.
if it's going from your action but not making it all the way your state, is that what you're
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah.
That probably means you're right here, right? You have this part right here is probably set up, right? Like your dispatch has a type, it has a payload, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then something is going on in your reducer, right? Where it is either not hitting the right case for that type, and so it's returning just your vanilla state, or your payload isn't being properly like you're not returning the correct copy of state with all the stuff in it. So I would make sure that like your actual reducer has a way to handle that type and it's doing it correctly.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to stop recording.